So today on the show, we have Mr. Mike Robertson. So big fan. I think I found you through Bill, and then I discovered your amazing YouTube channel, which has all kinds of exercises on there. You definitely make my programming life a lot easier for sure.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely, if you're a coach listening to this, definitely check those out. Your YouTube is phenomenal. I love it. So you keep it short and sweet. It's perfect. But yeah, Mike, if you don't mind, hit us with the elevator pitch and let's jump into it.
Yeah, dude. First off, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be on here. Man, I would like to say I've seen every nook and cranny of the fitness industry in my 22 years. I've been everywhere. I've done a little bit of everything from rehab to one-on-one, small group, large group. I've worked in like a rehab type environment. I've done personal training. I've done sport performance training, and like literally high school, college, pros. I've done a little bit of everything. And I think that's given me a pretty unique experience to draw from. But yeah, right now, basically live two lives. I've got my personal website, robertsontrainingsystems.com. Been creating content since essentially 2001, probably way before than I should have been creating content. But yeah, love to educate, love to give back. So that's where I do all my coaching, consulting, content creation. It all goes through that. And then iFast is the gym that Bill Hartman and I co-founded in 2008. Kind of run the gamut there. From he obviously takes care of all the physical therapy and rehab type clients. And then we run a either private or semi-private business model there. So yeah, man, a little bit of everything going on, lots to do and lots to keep me busy. But that's kind of the long and short of it.
Gotcha. Are you from Indianapolis?
So I'm from Muncie, which I try not to say too loudly. If you're from like the Midwest, you might have heard of Muncie. If not, chances are you have no clue where Muncie is. But little city, it's about an hour northeast of Indianapolis. My dad was actually a professor at Ball State, which is the college there. So I am something of a townie. But finally, about 24, got out. I lived in Fort Wayne for 3 years. And then after that, moved down to Indianapolis. And my wife and I have been here for like 17 years now.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've got some family that are creeping up from Kentucky up in into Indiana and all of that.
Okay.
And, I have a cousin up in Fort Wayne. So
okay.
I always have to ask, us Midwest type folk,
Yeah.
We're just far enough away, but also pretty close relative to the rest of the U.S. So
absolutely.
I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but how did you and Bill meet?
Yes. So great question. So in like 2002 to 2005, I'm working in rehab in Fort Wayne and doing a lot of stuff for T Nation. It's around this time that I meet a guy named Alan Cosgrove. If you've ever heard that name before, obviously very prominent in the business side of the fitness industry and just a great mentor to me early on in my career and really helped steer me in the right direction with regards to public speaking and running a business. So when I moved to Indianapolis, Alan was like, hey, you and Bill think very similarly. You're in the same city now. You guys should work to link up. And Bill must have been on email before me that day. He wrote me back and just said, hey, I saw you're a power lifter. You're competing. I'm a physical therapist. I do ART. Come over and I'll treat you for free. Now, keep in mind, 2005, 2006, ART is like the gold standard.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. I'll come over as a power lifter. I'm a little bit beat up. I was actually coming off a knee surgery at that point too. And so went over to Bill's house and this guy just bombed on me for like an hour. Like every muscle group, every ART area you could work on, he did. I got off that table, man. I just felt like $1 million, like all this range of motion in my shoulders. I'm like, oh man, I feel great. And as the hour's winding up, he's like got this music station going. Now, keep in mind, this is not like Pandora or anything like that. I don't know what station it was, or if it was just like that 5-disc CD changer that we had back in the day. But man, he's just killing it on the music. He's got Van Halen and Black Crowes and all these bands that I love growing up. It's like, dude, you've got really good music going on here. And he's like, oh, you like music? So that 1 hour ART session legitimately turned into a 4-hour just rap session. And we talked about music, we talked about training. And so really that just allowed us to kind of just explore this relationship and this friendship that we cultivated over the years. And those little hangout sessions turned into us writing articles together, creating Inside Out together, Assess and Correct. A lot of these old school products that we created back in the day really spun out of this time where we would just hang out in his basement and talk about training and rehab and, how to help people move and feel better. So it's pretty cool to think, here we are. I think we met in 2005, so 17 years, and we've been in business together at iFast for 14 now.
Wow.
It's been a pretty long, crazy trip, but man, I couldn't imagine doing it with anybody other than him, because he has been such a great mentor to me, really like a father figure in a lot of ways, and kind of pushed me to become the best trainer and coach I could be. But yeah, that's how we got started, man. I don't talk about that story all the time because not a lot of people ask it, but yeah, man, we go way back.
Yeah, that's cool. I love those types of conversations you can have with other people that are, that are professionals in the field.
Yeah.
And I've definitely been in those situations where it's like an hour turns into 4 hours. And then my wife's texting me and she's like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "Oh, yes. Yeah, I forgot." Like I've been talking about elbows and shoulders for 4 hours.
Absolutely. And we just had such a unique relationship because he's a physical therapist that loved to train, right? Like he was very into bodybuilding. He did some powerlifting, and I'm very much like a meathead. I was into powerlifting and strength and conditioning, but I just spent 3 years working in a chiropractic facility doing rehab. So it's like the overlap between our two worlds. We always kind of saw eye to eye on, hey man, we see the whole spectrum. Obviously his forte is the rehab side, and I'd like to think mine is the training side, but we've always seen both ends of that spectrum, and that's afforded us some really great conversations over the years.
Definitely. When it comes to, and this is kind of a selfish question, a little bit more business oriented for sure, but
sure.
What would you say is how do I say this? I mean, to be in business to know someone for 17 years and be in business for 14 years, like this is very broad, but how do you do it? Like what's your secret sauce, I guess?
Yeah. So I think when it comes down to this, there's really two things that come to mind. Number one is just having like-minded and similar values, right? So we've got similar values in the type of business we want to run, the level of excellence that we expect. So there's really no issue there. Like it's different if like one person expects excellence and the other person's like, whatever, I just want to get by and, make a little money. Or if one person runs everything by the books and somebody's kind of shady, like that relationship isn't going to work, right? So I think it's having these core values and then constantly communicating. And I think that's key of any relationship, right? Whether it's with your significant other, your business partner, it's kind of always keeping your ear to the ground as to, what's going on in their world, personally, professionally, because just because you're around somebody a lot doesn't mean you're always on the same wavelength. So I think it's really important to touch base, and, 14 years, 17 years that we've been around each other, that's enough time for a lot of major stuff to happen in your life.
Yeah.
Right. Personally and professionally. So I think just constantly keeping tabs on each other, communicating well, and having a lot of different ways to communicate. I don't love it, but having, Slack and text messaging and audio messaging and seeing each other in real life, like sometimes it's just stream of consciousness. Hey, I'm thinking about this, wanted to put it on your radar. And then sometimes it's those kind of in-person deep dives where it's like, okay, where are we at business wise? What are we good with? What do we want to change? What do we want to, continue to tweak or refine or evolve? But I think you got to have similar values, and you've got to be constantly touching base and communicating with each other. And if you have those two things, then you got the foundation for a really strong relationship, whether that's personally or professionally.
Gotcha. Would you say you both are type A, type B? I don't know if you subscribe to that, but I feel like everyone kind of knows what that is. But
dude, yeah, no, we're type A. We're both type A. And the interesting thing about us is we're both type A hardcore technicians, which is great for the training side of the business. It's not always as good for the business side of the business, because we're fascinated by training, working with humans, complex individuals. We're kind of at that point where we don't get a lot of just straight ahead, hey, I don't have any aches, pains, or issues. I can just go in and train right away. Like most of the people we get the people he gets are like, hey, you're my 6th physical therapist.
Right.
I've done rehab. I've done surgery. I'm still not getting better. So he gets those complex cases. And then a lot of cases, what happens is they go to him and then he gets them to a point where they can train. And now it's not just rehabilitation, it's reconditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So now those people that have had all those complex issues and injuries over the years are ours to try and build fitness on top of. So it's been really fun, but yeah, I would say we are hardcore type A's.
Yeah.
About as classically as they come.
Right. I got you. No, I could see that from, I was just curious about what you would say to that, but you can see it from both of your all's content, everything that you put out. And I will also say, you know, the excellency is there as well. So again, that YouTube channel, it's great. Like I'll plug it in for you. It's awesome. But so would you say that right now you're in a position where you really deal with more people in rehab or post rehab states, or are you getting athletes or just a mix of it all?
Yeah. So in the gym itself, we get a broad mix, and we get everything from your young athletes that are basically too fat or too slow,
Mm-hmm.
not explosive, not powerful enough. So, you know, I always joke around. For a while there, I was getting like hundreds of calls over the course of years, and nobody ever called and said, "Hey, little Johnny is too fast." You know, like it never happens, right? It's like, oh, little Johnny is great jump shot, but he can't get open. Or, hey, Susie is great on a soccer ball, but she's getting blown past on the soccer pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a lot of those young kids that just need general athletic development, like physical development. We get your adult population, your working class adults that just want to, you know, get back in the gym, maybe shed some body weight, add a little bit of muscle. We get adult, like basically like geriatric. I don't know if that's the appropriate term, but just older populations that want to stave off aging and move better, feel better, be able to play with their grandkids. So we get this really broad mix at the gym. I'm pretty honed in on athletes at this point in my career. That's what I grew up doing. I mean, I just loved athletics as a kid. I loved strength and conditioning. So when I figured out I could push these two together and make a job out of it, I was like, yeah, I'm all in, man. I get to show up in sweatpants and, you know, be around athletes all day. Like, who wouldn't want to do that? So for me, largely basketball at this point in my career, but I do have kind of an eclectic mix of, you know, I got some female basketball players. I got some female collegiate age soccer players, softball. I got a race car driver right now. So I've got a little bit of randomness sprinkled in, which I think is really good. Keeps me on my toes, keeps me learning and evolving. But, you know, my kind of in one focus right now is the basketball thing, because I just enjoy the sport. I love the guys. I love the culture. And there's really no 2 days that are alike there, because most of the guys I get just coming off of a competitive season have something that they're dealing with. So it's that early off season, like rehab, get them right, and then building them up to a point to where they're feeling 100% and fresh when they go into their season.
Do you ever feel like it's kind of like always having to repump a flat tire in some ways? Like, do these, especially higher level athletes, like, do you ever get them to a point where they're just like, they're always kind of coasting, or is it that competitive season, like they're always kind of beat up? And is that something, we'll keep it at that?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. There is that element of, and that's a great analogy, actually. We've all dealt with this, right? Like the bike's been in the garage all winter. Well, maybe not if you live in a warm climate, but you live in a cold climate and the bike's been in the garage all winter. Hey man, you got to go in and pump the bike back up, get it ready to go. And a lot of these basketball guys are like that, because competitive season could be as short as 6 months, could be as long as 9 or 10 months, depending on what they have going on. So yeah, it's a really long competitive season, man. So like being able to get them back in the gym, you're almost always starting at ground one or like base level to some degree. And you always have that, okay, what issues are they presenting with? What range of motions have they lost, or movement strategies have they lost over the course of that season? You're always thinking about rebuilding some component of tissue resiliency or connective tissue strength. So it can feel like Groundhog's Day a little bit and I think this is a big if you're not evolving as a coach in the meantime. And I think this has been something that's been really vital to me is, hey man, if I just ran the same off-season program every year and, you know, those same 3 or 4 blocks of training every
Right.
offseason, it probably would get pretty monotonous. But I'd like to think I'm taking that downtime or that slow time for me, and I'm trying to get better. So whether it's diving into a guy like Lee Taft, trying to get better at my speed and agility development, whether it's right now learning more about force plates and being able to look at data and constructively say, hey, this is what this athlete needs to work on in a very targeted and specific fashion. Like that's kind of what I'm working on this off season. So I think if you're constantly trying to tweak and evolve what you do, it's less so like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you're content being content and not changing or evolving, you know, every year, every off season, and yeah, it probably would feel like, hey, same old grind, 4 months, here we go. But I
Right.
don't approach it like that. I'm always looking for ways to make myself and my athletes better.
Well, and I feel, excuse me, I feel like with a lot of that too, you are having better discussions with these athletes as well, especially the ones that are serious. They're looking
Yeah.
for that edge.
Hmm.
And so you tell them something, they trust you, they're going to 9 times out of 10 do their best to apply it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, like you said, you have these great discussions, but it also kind of constantly reminds them, because let's be honest, it's Indianapolis, right? I'm not
Mhm.
in Miami or LA or New York or Phoenix, one of these like hotbed summer off-season training sites. So I pride myself on, hey, if we're going to run an off-season program where we're catering to Euro level, G League, and NBA caliber athletes, we better be really freaking good at what we do. We
Yep.
better give them something that's very hard to find elsewhere, because there are other places that are more exciting to be in
Right.
May, June, July, and August than Indianapolis. So, yeah, I mean, it allows you to have these great conversations. It allows you to kind of explain to them, hey, this is how we did it in the past. This is why we changed it or we've evolved it. This is how it's going to help you become a better player or athlete. So I think that's just such a big part of this process, is being able to communicate effectively and to effectively rationalize or explain to your athletes why you're doing things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people just assume, oh, they're an athlete, they don't care. Or maybe there's like a stereotype, oh, they're dumb and they don't get it. And maybe that's the case in some instances, but I've been very lucky. The athletes I have are very curious. They ask a lot of questions. They want to know. And I've always found that if I have this really well thought out, educated rationale for why I'm doing things, that they're going to buy in even more. They're going to put even more work in, and they're going to ultimately get better. So,
Right. Yep. So kind of getting back to, that potentially longer season, 9
yep.
months. What is it that's breaking these guys down over the course of a season? Like, is it lifestyle factors of being on the road and constant games, or is it literally playing the game that is, that will steal away some of their range of motion or their movement strategies?
Yeah. Man, it's really tough to say. And if I had a great answer for you, if I had the answer, I think I'd be getting paid a whole heck of a lot of money to go
Right.
consult for more NBA teams. But I think anytime you look at injuries, the one thing that most every piece of research will tell you is that it's multifactorial, right? And there's a lot of things that play into it. Um, travel is still not great. I know they've tried to make a lot of concessions. They've tried to alter the travel routines and minimize back-to-backs and give them more rest or days off in between. Travel's still hard. There's
Yeah.
still a lot of NBA games. And, look, if you're playing at an elite level on back-to-back nights and being asked to play 30, 35, maybe as many as 40 minutes, I don't care who you are, right? Like some of these guys are absolute freaks of nature. It's very hard on the human body.
Yeah.
So there's that element of it. Um, there is the fact that a lot of things that we would describe as superpowers. So if you're playing in the NBA, you have genetic, physical superpowers for the most part. So those things are great until they become a detriment.
Mhm.
So, hey, that big anterior orientation or those really stiff ankles, those things are great, but when left unchecked, can become issues, right? Now, oh man, now you've got a knee thing, or now you have an Achilles thing. So I think there's a lot of elements at play there. And not to mention the fact that just it's really hard to train consistently in season.
Right.
If you're a high minute guy, even if you're trying to use something like a high-low strategy or a quadrant system strategy, like Daniel Bove talks about, it's still really hard to get enough training volume in and develop those connective tissues and keep them working and functioning at a high level across the course of a season. I think that's now why you're seeing, well, number one, you're seeing much smarter training as a whole across the league. I think that's why you're seeing a better job of load management, like just taking better care of these guys, trying to give them nights off. But still, at the end of the day, these guys are competitors. They want, most of them want to play every night. They want to play as many minutes as they can. And some are better than others at taking care of their body off the court. So when you take all those things into account, it's like, it's really hard. And the final piece that I'll say on this is not everybody takes the off season as seriously as they should. Again, the guys that I've worked with, I've been very lucky. They buy into the weight room. They buy into this idea of using physical preparation to develop them to play at the highest level. And not everybody does. Unfortunately, a lot of guys are still in that mindset of, oh, I just play, I just hoop. And that'll get you, even the best of the best. At some point, that'll catch up to you. So, it's a very multifactorial thing. If I could say, oh, this one thing is the deciding factor, man, somebody would be paying me a lot of money to go consult for them or their club. But there's a lot of issues, I think, that play into it.
Yeah. I'd like to dive in a bit more into the specialization that you'll see, right? So, you use the idea of, the anterior orientation or anterior tilt, and then like stiff ankles. And then now that is leading to potentially a knee problem.
Yep.
Do you have any other ways of like explaining that, or like, again, just kind of why that might happen? Like, I guess before you do that, like the way I think of it, it's almost sort of, it's like I can drink 1 cup of coffee, right? Or I could drink 5 cups of coffee. Right. So over time, I might drink that 5 cups of coffee and I'll have more energy in the short term. But over, again, the course of months or something like that, it's may start to steal away some things.
Exactly.
Right? My sleep might start to become detrimental. I'm cracked out all the time. Like there's a bunch of different things that could happen. So that's kind of how I think of it. What's your take on it?
So Bill uses this analogy, and I think it's brilliant. He talks about having a superpower that's left unchecked. And this is the way I describe it to my athletes. First off, I'm all about pumping them up, right? I'm like, oh man, you're like a Ferrari, So like for a warm up, I'm like, hey, if it's 10 degrees outside, you don't just take the Ferrari, turn it on and just peel out of the garage, right? You turn it on, you let it warm up for 10 minutes. So that's how I sell a warm up. But nonetheless, the way he describes it is if you've watched some of the new Superman movies, when Superman starts to first get his powers, it's like overwhelming, right? Because he's got super hearing and he can hear all the voices and he can't tune it out. So it's a detriment. So that's the way I try and describe it to a lot of my athletes is, hey, look, this pelvis coming forward a little bit isn't a problem until it's too much. And now when you go to accelerate and you can't control that, right? Or you can't get your pelvis back underneath you, or it gets really locked and rigid. Well, now your back starts to hurt, right? Or maybe you pull a hamstring. Or another analogy I would use is, hey, stiff ankles are great for helping you plant and cut and be explosive out of a cut or jumping really high. But if you lose all of your ankle motion and now you can't load that ankle effectively, well, now another joint might be taking the brunt of it. So now your knee is getting beat up. So I always try and relate it back with some sort of context that's relevant to them. Because I could give them like the doomsday scenario, like, oh, you got to do this. But if there's nothing contextual for them, it's just like, oh, I'll be fine. It's like, it's human nature. It's not a big deal until it impacts you.
Right.
So that's something that I've always tried to do is like, when somebody has an issue with, say, a back or a knee or a hip or whatever, I'm trying to give them context as to how something else, maybe it is the knee, hip, or back that's actually the problem, but how all of the body is working together to create a movement strategy, and how at one point it might have been effective or optimal, and how by losing some of these ranges of motions, or by losing their movement variability, if you want to use that term, by losing some of these movement options, now that load is becoming very focal and it's potentially driving an issue.
Gotcha. I like that analogy a lot. It reminds me of have you watched the show The Boys?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So like that, like the very first episode where the guy like unfortunately takes out the lady, like he's like running as fast as possible. And it's like that's a superpower unchecked right there.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Yes. So, wow. Great show analogy, first of
Right.
all, but and definitely don't watch that with loved ones.
No.
Watch that by yourself first,
Yeah.
and then see if it's appropriate for the people around you.
Yeah, that is. I was
It's
like, should I
wild.
bring this show up? I don't know. That's intense. Like,
It's pretty wild. Yes.
right. But no, it's a great analogy. I like that. So getting into the athletic development, this is another thing I've always thought about, and it can kind of go two different ways. And we can tackle both separately, but what is the thing that takes these athletes to that next level? Right. So obviously you have like younger kids, you were already talking about, condition them, right? Like just get them better at being humans and moving, right? But then you have these higher level athletes, and I always think of like Anthony Davis, right? Like before he was playing college ball. I was lucky enough to see him, win the NCAA tournament. That was awesome. But skin and bones, right?
Yes.
Like if he landed wrong, you're like, man, is he going to break his arm? Like what's going to happen? And I think he still to this day has some of those issues, but at the same time, like he's beefed up a ton in comparison to what he was back in college. So I look at that as maybe something that has helped him take his game to the next level.
Yes.
To some way. But I'm kind of already answering my own question, but what would you say is that takes that higher level athlete to the next level?
Yeah. So there's really two paths that somebody has to carve out, right? On one path is just like the pure physical tools necessary to compete at the highest level. So if you can only touch 10 foot, right? If you're 5'4" and you can only touch 10 foot, you can barely touch the rim, you're going to struggle to play in the NBA, right? You don't have the physical tools and outputs necessary. And, again, the guys that I've seen that are at a very high level, most of them are going to be able to touch 11.3, 4, most of them 11.5, 11.6 and higher. Great example, Glenn Robinson, played like 7-8 years in the NBA, won an NBA dunk contest. The highest I ever measured Glenn on a Vertec was 12.1. He said his best ever when he was at Michigan was 12.4, which if you know anything about a Vertec, you can't even go above 12. They had to put the Vertec on top of a 4-inch box to measure that.
That's wild.
And he actually recently took a year and a half off, came back in the gym and just trained for like a month because he wanted to get in shape and we wanted to catch up a little bit, and he could still touch 11 tip. So point there being, some people have God's gifts and they have legitimately superpowers, right? That most of us can only dream of. So that's one avenue, right? You have to have the physical tools and outputs necessary to play at that level. The second piece of that is elite level skill. And so the best of the best can combine both of those, right? If we've got like this sliding scale, if you think like Michael Jordan, right? Elite level athleticism, virtually unparalleled, along with elite level skill. So that guy is destined, and elite level work ethic, if we're counting that too. So,
right.
I mean, we have like an unparalleled athlete. A Kobe would be like that.
Trifecta.
Legitimately like a trifecta. But then if you don't have maybe that level of athleticism, you have to make up for that with elite level skill. And so in basketball, a very skill dominant sport, you better be an amazing ball handler, amazing court vision, an amazing shooter. You have to have other things that fill in the gaps. And one thing that I always talk about with young guys that I work with, maybe high level college athletes, guys that are in a pre-draft type of environment where, maybe they're going to play in summer league or they're going to go overseas. One of the discussions that I always have with them is, if you're going to make it in the NBA, you have to be elite at least one thing. Now, what that one thing is up to you. Some guys are just purely elite athletes, and they're so good athletically that teams will take a flyer on them. They'll, figure out some way to rationalize, hey, we can develop him, we can give him some skill. But if you don't have that, then we better move your athleticism as high as we can. And then you have to do some things from a skill development perspective to make you elite. And most of the guys I've worked with, based on my time being here and also working with a skill development coach by the name of Joey Burton. Joey is an elite shooting coach, and now his understudy, Scott Romaniuk, is here. But yeah, Joey was an elite shooting coach. So that was kind of our tandem, was like, hey, I'm going to give you guys as much athleticism as I can to move you as high up that scale as I can. And then if this is going to be your thing, if you're going to be known as a shooter, Joey's going to try and ratchet you up as high as you can in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of how I think about it, is those are the two like non-negotiable pieces. And then every athlete is going to have to kind of slide that scale as high as they can in both regards.
Gotcha. That makes sense. When it comes to the skill development, would that look like, especially for these, higher level athletes, is that just playing the game more?
In a lot of cases, no.
Okay.
And a lot of people are, I don't want to say put off, but they're a little bit shocked by that. And I think it's interesting because I've been around elite level football players, right? You can't go out and play football every day.
Right.
You might be able to go out and run some routes and that sort of thing, or work on drops, but you can't go out and physically play football every day. A lot of the soccer players I've worked with, and maybe it's the virtue of the level that I worked with here, because whether it was the USL, the NASL, even some of my MLS guys, the off season is so short that it doesn't afford you a lot of time to work on your individual game. And it's such a team-based game, right? You got to think there's 11 people on the field. Right. The amount of time you actually have the ball at your feet is generally very small. But basketball is a unique sport in the sense that it's a long enough off season. There's a good amount of time for skill development. And so the guys that I work with are not just with me 4 or 5 days a week. They're working on their game 4 or 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. And so they will play more as the off season goes on. And that's a combination of, you need to play, obviously, but also there's no more specific conditioning to basketball than playing basketball.
Right.
But man, skill development, whether it's ball handling, whether it's shooting, finishing, there's so many elements to that, yeah, man, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. And I think that's where you see these guys that really improve year over year. They're putting in the work in the off season. Nobody just magically gets better, just hanging out or just playing every day. I think most of the great ones and the guys that you see big jumps from year over year, they might be playing a decent amount, but they're in the gym working on their craft as well and working on their skills to make them the best possible player they can be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's a good reminder for people out there. Just, there's, especially with these higher level athletes, but I am curious, thinking about, say, a high school level athlete that's trying to just get into some sort of collegiate program or something. Like, is that someone you might tell, hey, just play the game more? Like, you just need to go out and do that. Like, what does that look like?
Again, I think it comes down to, there's an element of looking at each athlete.
Right.
So the handful of kids that I have worked with, there is a time and a place to play more. And I think it comes down to the kid. There's certain kids that I watch play sports, and I can say this because I'm coaching my kids now, watching middle school, high school age kids. There's some kids that just have an amazing feel for the game, but they don't have the skills necessary to play at the next level, right? They don't have the individual skill yet. There's others that have the individual skill, but don't understand the team concepts, right? Maybe they don't understand spacing or cutting or things of that nature. So that's where you have to kind of like look at each kid. And one of the things that I tried to do with my daughter's girls, because I coached her soccer team for years and just stopped this past year, I always tried to give the parents like, hey, here are certain things that this girl needs to work on to take her game to the next level. Some girls just needed to work on their physicality, right? Great skill players, great feel for the game, but didn't like contact. They didn't like it when people were physical. So how do you get them better at that? There were other girls that had a good feel for the game, but just physically didn't have the foot skills, right? somebody passes them the ball and it bounces off their foot like a tennis racket, right? Like no control over the ball. So it's like, hey, that girl just needs to get on a ball.
Yeah.
She needs more touches. And then there's other girls who are great athletes, try super hard, pretty good foot skills, but just no concept of where to be in a game, right?
Mhm.
Like they're in 6th grade and still like running right to the ball. Or, there's 3 people between their teammate who has the ball and them, and they're still calling for the ball, like me, pass. There's just no awareness of how to
Mhm.
play the game, spacing, where to be. So I think it becomes very individual. And you obviously see that at the highest levels too. It's very nuanced at that point. But I think when you're evaluating any athlete, it's breaking down, okay, what are they really good at? What are their weaknesses or their rate limiters? And then trying to always say, okay, these are the things that are really holding you back from getting to the next level. Don't ever lose sight of your strengths. Keep working on those, but you got to bring up these rate limiters if you want to continue to evolve or play at the next level.
Gotcha. Would you say so again, skill development, obviously there's that component, but could you like pair an off-season sport like effectively with, I'm thinking of soccer. It's like, okay, like say someone needs more physicality or something, and I don't know, would you tell them to go play wrestling like at a different part of the time of the year or something? Like, is that something you ever played around with?
I have not, but there are other ways to do that, right?
Mhm.
So maybe not with middle school age kids, but like high school age kids. That's one area where I would definitely say getting in the weight room, just
Yeah.
getting physically stronger and a little bit more imposing might help. It's also something that you can cultivate if you're the sport coach in a practice, right? So what I may do is, because I'm mean like this, but if somebody doesn't like physicality, I'm going to go find the most physical person and tell them to mark that girl
Yeah.
the entire time. Don't let her touch the ball. Be physical, be rough, to see how they respond. And obviously, you're never trying to hurt somebody, but just trying to see if you can raise their level of play, make them a little bit more immune to that physicality, or maybe in a best case scenario, start to fight back a little bit.
Hmm.
So I think it's creating environments and contexts where, okay, hey, this is something you struggle with. I'm going to put you in an environment and make you deal with some adversity and then see what comes out of that.
Right. Yeah. That seems like but again, Mike, not everyone's you. Not everyone's a coach like you. So
I can't shut my brain off. This is the way I think.
right.
So
Yeah. I just think back to high school. I would always, it was always funny because I ran cross country in high school,
yep,
and we would always have a bunch of wrestlers that would join the team.
yep.
And they were like, yeah, we're getting our endurance up during this. And, they'd have like I think a dip in, like running like 5Ks and all this stuff. I'm like, okay,
Right.
whatever. Like these guys obviously aren't that serious about it, but they said all the time that it would make them better at wrestling, their primary sport.
Yep.
So, and then I would do a lot of swim in preparation for track,
Yep.
actually. And I actually noticed relatively a relative improvement in my sprint speed, or at least kept my conditioning up throughout the season, ready for
Yep.
track at that point. So,
Yep.
but I get all kinds of multi-sport athletes, and it's always interesting to see how they kind of cross over and can carry over into other sports.
Yeah. And I think I'm a huge advocate for playing multiple sports. It's
Mhm.
getting harder all the time. And if you get these athletes that are locked into one sport, doing your best as a strength coach, personal trainer, rehab professional, whatever title or moniker you go by, trying to find ways, if they are specializing, to diversify their training when they're with you.
Well, and like
So,
you said, the weight room is a great way to do. Like I have a cousin who, I mean, he's as specialized as it gets in baseball. Like
yeah.
that's all he does. He plays
Yep.
fall ball. I mean, it's year round for him. And I told him, I was like, the weight room's your second sport at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to take this seriously. It's going to keep you healthy. It's going to keep you strong. It's going to take you to that next level.
Yep.
And since I've had that conversation, I mean, he's put on like 11 pounds of muscle, 12 pounds of muscle, like
Awesome.
in this winter in like a 3-month span. I'm like, let's go, man. Like
Yeah.
he's a junior going into his senior year, and I'm super excited to see what he does.
He's going to hit bombs.
Right.
We used to always talk about with those like young high school age baseball players, And look, I'm not one of these guys that just thinks it's all about mass, but man, just putting a little bit of size and a little bit of strength development on these stringy kids,
Hmm.
especially in baseball, makes such a huge difference, man. They go from, singles and doubles to hitting the ball really hard. So it's fun to watch, man.
Definitely. That actually leads into a really good question I have for you over here. So when it comes to, taking that athleticism up for someone, we're trying to take that one up a bit. Is that a lot of times just adding mass, or are we trying to, obviously there's power, there's so many different factors you can play with,
Yep.
but at the root of it, would you say it's mass?
I don't know if I would say it's mass, but I would say a lot of it is underpinned by force development, at least early on. Um, a lot of kids, I mean, we've all seen it, right? Like the kid that has never touched a weight, never been in a weight room, you put them on any sort of halfway decent strength training program for 6 to 12 months, and they look physically transformed. Now,
Right.
part of that is just puberty and the hormonal cocktail that they're bathing in every day. But man, just getting them some foundational strength development, I think, can be huge. And
Mm-hmm.
then again, it comes down to, okay, how strong is strong enough? What is the ideal body composition or body mass for the sport that they play? Do they need to add muscle, shed body fat? Are they one of these kids that's very strong, but also very slow? So then it starts to be tweaked and refined. But I think a lot of stuff can be solved by just really a foundational 6 to 12 months in a weight room, basic exercises, right? It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Teach them to goblet squat, push up, split squat or lunge, do an effective chin up, own their own body weight in different positions and ISO holds. You start with basic stuff like that, and man, it's amazing the development you can see in a kid. And then you can start to get really like fun and nuanced as to what you want to tease out. But I think that formative 6 to 12 months when you get somebody in a weight room
Mm-hmm.
and makes such a huge impact on their physical development going forward.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's my personal favorite time. I love
Yeah.
that 6 to 12
Yeah.
months. It's just, man, it's almost like a very prolonged boot camp, and it's fun. The energy's high, and then it's interesting to watch the kids at that point take that new athleticism and really just, it's like they open the door when they start playing again, and they just do so much more. It's really rewarding at that point. And I'll even say, just from, so I've been going through, like, the past year, I've been going through another series of this, where trying to get more serious with bodybuilding. And
Yep.
so I've been doing like a year-long bulk at
Oh,
this
wow.
point. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm up, like 35 pounds at
Oh
this
my
point.
gosh.
Yeah. So it's going great.
Gains.
Right, exactly. So I've gone, from like 180 all the way up to, I just weighed in at 218 this morning. So trying to get to
Wow.
225, but even doing that and getting more, I guess, specialized toward my lifts and everything that I'm doing, it's been transformative. Like the numbers that I can hit. And that's why I was curious, like, is it just mass? But that's me also being biased to bodybuilding,
Yeah.
which it is just mass at that point.
And look, like, especially in some sports, right? So like baseball, to an extent, there's a reason. I think Eric Cressy posted this, but a while back, like the average major league player was like 185 to 190 pounds.
Right.
And now they're like 215 to 220,
Mm-hmm.
So there is some merit to that. And whether it's a sport like baseball, obviously in certain sports like throwing, if you're a shot putter or a hammer thrower or a world's strongest man, there's a reason they're
Yeah.
really massive, huge people. But I think in some instances, like sometimes you see this where the football coach is the strength coach for the school, and then all of a sudden his goal is to get everybody just powerlifting strong for every sport.
Yeah.
I don't think that always works out, right? Because basketball players and soccer players all have different types of body shapes and types
Mm-hmm.
that are advantageous to their sport. So I don't think you can say it globally, but I think force development and force production underpins a lot of stuff and is foundational for a lot of the future training that comes after it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that muscle mass is more of a, I hate using the term, but like an injury preventer in a lot of ways?
I don't know if it's just purely the muscle, but I think it's the connective tissue strength you get while you're acquiring the muscle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So we all know, like, if you strength train, your muscles don't get bigger in isolation, right? Like your muscles get bigger. The connective tissues between your muscles, your tendons, and your actual joints, the bones, everything gets bigger and thicker and stronger, right? So again, I think as a foundational tool, you can't go wrong there. Now, again, people take that idea and they're like, oh, well, if some is good, a lot more is better. And that's where you see the kids 5 years later that are slowing down because their coach is treating them like a power lifter, right? And if it takes you 10 seconds to complete a back squat, that's great on a powerlifting platform, but it doesn't carry over to a football field.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think it's not so much the fact that you're just building muscle, but it's the byproduct of when you're in the gym and you're building those muscles, you're developing all those other tissues as well. And I think that makes for just overall a more resilient and more robust athlete.
Yeah, totally. That just reminds me. So recently, the weights haven't been going up as much as I'd like. Yeah. And so I was like, man, like what's going on? What am I doing? My sleep's on point. My calories are on point. And I started to realize that I started cheating my range of motion a bit and getting a little bit greedy. Yeah. And I was like, okay, let's take the weight down a little bit. Let's go full range of motion. Yeah. And I was, I even had like a little bit of shoulder pain kind of going through these past couple of weeks, but going and really focusing on the full range of motion, letting the muscles work and just sort of, I guess, let the body self-organize and maybe strengthen up some connective tissue along with adding more muscle. And then now it's like blasting past those weights that I was struggling with 3 weeks ago. No problem.
That's awesome.
Right. So it goes to say in working with some enhanced athletes, they have been, I found out, like, wow, you are so much more prone to some of these connective tissue problems because their muscles blow up so quickly that their connective tissue can't keep up with it.
Yes. So if you go back and read like the old Mel Siff stuff, and for you young coaches, Mel Siff was like an OG when I was coming up. Wrote a book called Super Training, had like this, I don't even know, it was like a forum/email. I don't even know how to describe it. Basically, he wrote a lot of stuff. I don't think he ever slept, and he wrote a lot about training. But one of the things that Mel always talked about was if you're going to train athletes that are enhanced or using some advanced supplements, if you will, they are much more prone to connective tissue injuries. So a lot of these early off-season phases that he would include, these high volume phases or like long duration sets, he would actually double the amount of time. So if normally you would spend 4 weeks on that, he would spend upwards of 8 weeks on that, spending a lot of time developing those connective tissues. Because like you alluded to, the muscles just explode, right? Like they get so strong so quickly. And if it outpaces the strengthening of your connective tissues, now you're a lot more susceptible to a pec tear or a quad tendon tear or patellar tendon tear, something of that nature. So yeah, just something to note. I don't believe I've worked with too many of those over the years, but if it's something you're doing, by all means, that's your choice. Make sure you're taking some extra time to develop that connective tissue early on in your off season before you start ramping up into more intensive types of training.
Totally. Would you say just like doubling down on isometrics and making sure that's like in your prep work all the time? Like that would be a good.
Absolutely. Isometrics. I like long duration ISO holds there early in an off season. I love just general high volume work where you're, 30, 40 plus seconds of time under tension, really slowing down times under tension. So less of an elastic response where it's more of those 3-0-1, 4-0-1 tempos.
The stuff no one wants to do.
The stuff nobody wants to do, right? It's miserable. Like when I'm writing that as a coach, I'm just thinking about how awful that is and how I feel bad writing it. But it's also to the benefit of the client or athlete standing in front of me. So I wouldn't write it if it wasn't valuable, but that doesn't mean it's not going to suck.
Yeah, it doesn't. I know that they don't want to do it and I don't want to do it, but we have to.
Yes. That's why we coaches need coaches too, to write in all the stuff that we wouldn't do on our own.
That's a good reminder. I need that reminder. So this is a completely selfish question. So I've already, told you I've gone through this bulk. I'm trying to hit 225, and then I'm going to start my cut. And with that cut, I'm going to try to regain my athleticism, because I've definitely lost a good amount.
Sure.
This was the first time in my life where I've been like, I'm slow. Like going upstairs is hard. Like,
yes.
So if you had 3 big things to focus on, to kind of ramp back up in athleticism, like some track work, something like that. Like what are, you had a bodybuilder that walked into your gym tomorrow and was like, I want to be athletic again.
Yep.
What would you do?
This is so crazy that you asked this. And I'm going to give you like a 30-second backstory. But for some reason, my kids have been on me a lot here lately. And they're like, Dad, we want to watch you play something. Right? Now, keep in mind, I haven't played competitive sports in a long time. Right? But they're obsessed with watching me play soccer. So I just agreed to play in this men's soccer league that I'm going to have to do here in the next couple weeks, months, whatever. So I'm literally thinking about this right now. And I'm going through some of this myself. So a couple things that I think are really important. And it's like the opposite of what we just talked about, right? I think part of it is just rebuilding your elasticity in your stretch shortening cycle, right? Now, that doesn't mean you have to go out and do max effort box jumps day one, but like I'm starting with low level stuff like, little hurdle hops with jumping rope, low level plyometric activities, just to, again, rebuild the stretch shortening cycle, rebuild like, your lower leg complex, because those are things where if you don't do that, all of a sudden your heel hurts or your Achilles hurt or your foot hurts. So low level plyometric activities, I think, are important. Working on deceleration, which is something like deceleration with speed, I think is something that a lot of people don't think about. So just fast acting activities, anything where you have to plant, cut, stop. And if you're worried about doing those things with just your body weight, a lot of times we'll do band resistance to start. So put a band on somebody to slow them down so there's less momentum. But I think that piece is going to be really important. It's just getting used to absorbing force again. Because so much of what we do in the weight room, we're absorbing it, but it's more about force production.
Right.
Versus absorbing or redirecting forces with speed or with pace. So I'd say that's number 2. And then the third thing would be, rebuilding your sport-specific conditioning. So, for basketball or soccer, it's not going out and running 3 or 4 or 5 miles at a steady state pace. It's jogging for a while and then sprinting and then planning and cutting. So getting back into that sort of thing and being kind of thoughtful and progressive about it. Right. Obviously, I'm not going to go out and just try and sprint and plant and cut all in the first week.
400 repeats on.
Right. So hopefully I've got a little bit of time to build up to this. But I'd say those would probably be the 3 things is, the low level, like plyometric type activities, getting used to decelerating, again, stopping and starting, and then rebuilding some sport specific conditioning. If I could only get 3, that would probably be it.
Okay. That's what I was thinking. But I think the idea of starting off a little bit slower than what I was probably going to do is and that's something too. I've been trying to maintain what I can throughout this. So I have some plyometrics, box jumps. But it's like 5% of my whole workout routine. So hopefully it's maintained some, but
and you have to make some sacrifices, right?
100%.
It's not like you're trying to add 5 pounds. You've added what, 30, 40 pounds?
Right.
That's a lot. Like that's significant. So if you're going to make a massive change like that, other things have to be kind of left by the weight side, and like you said, you've done your best to maintain it. So now as you start to peel some of that weight off and cut, it's not going to be like you're starting over, right? And it'll be easier to get back into it. So I think that's very smart of you to kind of approach it like that.
Would you say that going after this, so I use the example like going through full range of motion, not cheating myself. Is that something that's going to be beneficial, like going forward, because that connective tissue is probably stronger through that? So that'll help me as I'm progressing into more plyometric, getting my elasticity back.
Yes, I think so. And I think one of the biggest issues we see with people that do break down over time is they get really big, really fast. They become very stiff. So they lose range of motion. So now they start to load heavier weights through a shorter range of motion. It's this like vicious cycle.
Right.
Versus if you're constantly using range of motion as a check of, hey, I am trying to get stronger, but I'm always going to use this like range of motion as my gold standard. Yeah, I think you're going to be a lot more successful kind of turning this around and coming it back out of it versus the person who isn't doing those things. And like I said, is continuing to put on size, get stronger, lose range of motion. And then it's just this cycle where now it's like, okay, now not only do I have to, get my athleticism back and all these things, but I've just got to start by getting my range of motion back.
Yeah.
I have to start restoring that range of motion before I can even think about doing some of these other things.
Yeah, totally. That makes, and I mean, I was that person for years. Honestly, I didn't even make this realization until this year in terms of like, oh, I'm cheating myself right now.
Yeah.
Like I'm using less and less range of motion over time. And then just, like you said, vicious cycle. So it's,
yes.
But using this as a check has been extremely beneficial. And I think it's allowed me to put on as much weight, progress as much as I have at this point without having some injury that,
yes,
takes me and puts me on the sidelines. And then I'm stuck in that rehab, purgatory of some sort. So
I think that's the biggest thing, man. And the people that do it at the highest level for the longest periods of time are slower. They're more methodical, but they don't have those massive injuries that kind of derail them. They just kind of stay healthy and keep plugging along for a really long period of time.
Right. And that's a realization I made too, is just not getting injured.
Yeah.
Like that's really the, where success starts. Like any pro athletes, like they just don't get injured. Like try to, we don't want to say prevent, but like take care of whatever little nagging thing is there. But at the same time, like just stay in the game or stay in whatever thing you're doing as long as you possibly can.
Yes, absolutely, man. And, whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting, like those accumulated gains over time make a huge difference. If you're in professional sports, hey, man, if you're available every night and you can go when they need you, and you stick around long enough, you make a lot of money doing that. So,
yeah, really,
it's competitively advantageous to stay healthy and be able to train and compete at a high level for a long period of time.
For sure. Well, you think about caveman, right? Like Tonto out there, he's able to stay healthy the longest. Like,
that's right. That's right. That's where we've descended from, right?
Exactly. Right. So, well, Mike, I think we're getting toward the end of here. I really appreciate you hopping on this call. This was awesome. If you don't mind, man, hit us with the socials, hit us with the products, all that good stuff.
Yeah, man, I'll keep it short. So I always give two options. Number one, if you just want free stuff, articles, podcasts, videos, the video archive is on the webpage, robertsontrainingsystems.com. You could literally go through years worth of content. Like I said, I've been creating content since 02 or 03. So if you want free stuff and you just want to learn more about me and what I do, you can go there. If you are a coach or trainer and you want to level up, a lot of times people get a cert and then they start training people and realize the cert has not helped them train people in real life. So CompleteCoachCertification.com is the product that I created to help kind of bridge that gap from I have a cert, but I'm not having success to now I'm confident and comfortable. It'll help you write better programs, coaching you more effectively, and just take better care of the clients and athletes you work with. So RobertsonTrainingSystems.com for free stuff. CompleteCoachCertification.com for the cert and how I train people.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And thank you all for listening to the show.